Finish the chores before you leave. You're my son's wife, so that's your responsibility. As I hurried to the visitation hour for my mom's passing, my mother-in-law, Karen, blocked my way with those words. Even in this moment, she wanted to burden me with housework. My chest tightened with frustration. Today, of all days, I muttered, trying to hold back my feelings. But then, she said something even more unbelievable. I'm not going to the visitation hour. I don't want anyone thinking I'm part of your family. The anger, the sadness, and even the disbelief drained away. I didn't have the energy to reply anymore. Silently, I pushed past Karen and headed toward the door. But she wasn't done yet. Furious with my defiance, she stormed after me, her heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. Before I could turn around, I felt something being dumped over my head. What visitation hour? You should just disappear into ashes with her. It was the ash from an ashtray. She had poured it over my head. That was the moment my heart broke completely. If this is what she truly wanted, then I would grant her wish. You're right. Maybe I should just disappear. I resolved to take action not just against Karen, but also against my husband, Matthew. My name is Naomi. I work at the company my dad built from the ground up. My dad is a well-known figure in the industry, respected, warm, and friendly to everyone. My dream has always been to follow in his footsteps and become a leader just like him. Day by day, I learned how to work and lead by watching him closely. The work was tough, but the sense of fulfillment kept me going. Then one day, everything changed. Dad suddenly collapsed. He had always been so energetic and lively that it was hard to believe at first. But his illness progressed rapidly, and before long, he needed constant care. This wasn't just a devastating blow to our family. It was a crisis for the company. Without its founder, the business quickly spiraled into confusion. Fearing the company's downfall, the leadership team convened, and it was decided I would take over as CEO in my dad's place. Taking over the company had always been my dream, but not like this. Honestly, I felt nothing but fear and anxiety. I lacked both experience and knowledge. While many of the employees who had worked with my dad for years supported me, others couldn't trust someone in their 30s to lead, and started leaving one by one. To make matters worse, we faced a severe labor shortage and an economic downturn. Despite my efforts to stabilize the company, the business performance didn't improve. Even at home, I couldn't rest. My mind was consumed by thoughts of work, leaving me physically and mentally drained. Around this time, I received an offer from a fast-growing, well-known company in the same industry. They wanted to provide financial support. I couldn't help but wonder why a small company like ours caught their attention. It felt suspicious, like there was some hidden agenda. Still, my desire to protect the company my dad had built outweighed my doubts. Most importantly, I wanted to secure the livelihoods of the employees who had stood by me. So I decided to accept the offer. Not long after, a representative from the company that offered the funding started visiting us regularly. His name was Matthew. Matthew was a man around my age, with a polite demeanor. Whenever I felt nervous during meetings about the funding, he had a way of easing the tension with his kind nature. After meeting several times, our conversations extended beyond work, and we began sharing bits of our personal lives. It had been so long since I had spoken with someone so openly. At first, it felt strange, but his approachable nature gradually melted my defenses. "You seem really busy lately. Are you taking care of yourself?" he asked. It had been ages since someone had shown me kindness like that. His words struck a chord deep within me. Before I knew it, His warmth began to occupy a significant space in my heart. His dedication to his work inspired me, and I found myself looking forward to the time we spent together. Naturally, our relationship evolved into something more, and soon after, we celebrated our long-awaited wedding. It was shortly after we got married that he suggested we move in with his mother. Matthew had lost his father at a young age, and he explained, "I can't leave Mom alone." I had heard about his family and understood his commitment to his mother, so I agreed to live with her. But living with his mom, Karen, was the start of a challenging chapter in my life. Karen didn't approve of how much time I spent away from home for work. Every time we saw each other, she would make snide remarks. "Is it okay to neglect your family like this? I'm sorry. Work has been hectic. Once things settle down, I'll try to come home earlier." "What's the point? You don't even help with anything around the house when you're here." Each word felt like a stab, but all I could say was, "I'm sorry." Karen's cold gaze made me feel unwelcome in my own home. On top of that, Matthew had become distant since our marriage. At first, I thought it was just his busy schedule, but over time, he stopped responding to me altogether. "Hey, do you have some time tonight? Maybe we can grab dinner together," I suggested. "Dinner sounds fine, but before that, can you start paying more attention to how you look?" "What do you mean?" I asked, puzzled. "You've put on weight lately. You used to be slim and gorgeous before we got married. Now it's like I married someone else. This is marriage fraud." Marriage fraud. That cold, cutting remark pierced my heart. After that, every time I tried to bring something up, he would deflect by commenting on my weight. Each remark chipped away at me a little more. Matthew had always been close to his mom, often saying, "I can never repay my mom for everything she's done for me." While appreciating his devotion to his mother was one thing, their relationship went beyond normal bounds. He had never truly separated himself from Karen, and Karen seemed unwilling to let go of him. As a mama's boy, Matthew constantly compared me to his mom, always finding ways to criticize me. "If it were my mom, she would have done this differently," he would say, putting Karen on a pedestal and tearing me down. I felt like I was becoming more and more isolated between the two of them. As my relationship with her worsened, Matthew's attitude toward me also grew harsher. It seemed like he was upset that I couldn't get along with Karen. Almost every day, he criticized my approach to housework and my dedication to my work. Matthew started boasting like he was already the CEO, constantly saying things like, "I'm respected by the CEO. Pretty soon, I'll be running this company. Trust me, follow my lead, and you'll have an easier life." I wasn't sure how serious he was, but it just sounded like empty boasting to me. Amidst all this, there was something else that had been bothering me recently. I kept spotting him with other women. One day, I saw him walking down the street with a woman I didn't recognize, and it shook me to the core. Could he be cheating? I wondered. But with my late hours, I had no way of verifying anything. Finally, one day, I decided to confront him. "Hey, I happened to see you with that woman today." "Who was she?" Matthew glared at me. "Why do you have to question everything I do? You got that? If I tell the CEO, I could shut your company down in an instant." His words sent a wave of both anger and fear through me. How could Matthew use the company my family built as a tool for intimidation? I felt the trust I had in him crumbling, piece by piece. But my troubles weren't just with him. Karen's treatment of me was just as bad. Karen did absolutely nothing around the house. From morning till night, she would sit on the couch watching TV or fiddling with her smartphone, leaving all the household chores to me. No matter how late I worked, When I got home, the house was a mess, and she didn't care how tired I was. She'd order me to clean the house as soon as I walked in. Of course, I understood that housework was part of my responsibilities, but I resented being scolded by Karen, who did nothing all day. Still, I couldn't say anything. I was just forced to comply. Matthew seemed to think it was natural for me to do all the housework for Karen. On top of that, she would freely criticize her husband, saying things like, he was totally useless. One day, after I put a lot of effort into cooking dinner, Karen's response was just as harsh. "What's this? It's disgusting. I can't let Matthew eat this." And with that, she threw the meal I had made into the trash. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Sometimes Karen would cook dinner, but she never prepared any food for me. Even when I was so exhausted that I fell asleep on the couch, she showed no mercy. Sleeping at home like that, what a privilege. Ouch. I woke up to an intense pain and saw an angry Karen standing in front of me, with the TV remote at her feet. I couldn't believe she'd throw something at me like that. At that point, I couldn't stand living this way anymore. I decided I had to ask Matthew to move out of the house. "Matthew, please, I can't keep living with Karen. I just can't." "What? You've got a problem with my mom." "It's not that. I just need some time for myself." "You're telling me you can't take care of my mom?" Before I could say anything else, Matthew hit me across the face. "You just keep quiet and do what I say. What me and Mom tell you to do." At first, I was so shocked I didn't know how to respond. But after that, whenever something didn't go his way, he started using violence. The feeling of being cornered only grew stronger with each passing day. Then one day, I received a call from the police. "Your mom has been in an accident." The calm voice on the other end of the phone sounded distant, as if from another world. I could only hold the receiver tightly, in stunned silence. When Dad fell ill, Mom had taken on the responsibility of caring for him, saying, "Protect Dad's precious company." She had done everything herself, but with Dad's income gone, things had become tight, and apparently, Mom had secretly taken a part-time job to avoid burdening me. She worked late into the night, would grab short naps whenever she could, and then go back to caring for Dad. How much had she suffered? How much pain had she been in? I never realized how much she was struggling. I was so focused on work that I couldn't even see it. "Please, at least let me go home for a few days." I had asked Matthew, but he refused every time. "Now that you're married, your priority should be this house, right?" I regretted not being able to help with living expenses more. If I had paid attention to Mom's struggles earlier, things might not have turned out like this. Mom had fallen asleep at the wheel because of exhaustion and caused the accident. I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. I was led not to her room, but to the morgue. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do anything for you." As I spoke, my chest tightened more and more with each word. Even though Matthew and Karen opposed me, I couldn't help but think that if I had gone back sooner, I could have been more of a help. I kept speaking to Mom, even though I knew she would never answer again. Afterwards, I stepped in to handle Mom's funeral arrangements, taking Dad's place since he couldn't move. Of course, Matthew and Karen didn't help. I was so busy, I felt like I might collapse, but I managed to hold on. On the day of the visitation, I was about to leave the house to go to Mom. That's when Karen called out to stop me. "Do the housework first. You're Matthew's wife, so it's your responsibility, right? The house is a mess because you've been slacking off lately." Even at a time like this, she was still trying to push housework onto me. My chest tightened in frustration. Today, of all days. Quit being pathetic. You both quit your jobs, and now you're living. Boy, how embarrassing. The insults didn't stop there. I don't want to be thought of as family, so I'm not going to the visitation. Beyond anger, sadness, and even disbelief, I was so exhausted I couldn't even muster a response. I pushed past Karen without saying a word and tried to leave the house. But apparently, my attitude didn't sit well with her. She chased after me, her footsteps loud and heavy. Before I could even turn around, something hit me on the back of the head. You think you're going to a visitation? Why don't you just disappear like ash? I could see Karen's smug grin on my face. It seemed she had thrown the ash from the ashtray onto my head. You're right, I said quietly. I'll disappear. I said nothing as I walked away, not even looking back. I could hear Karen's furious voice behind me, but I stayed silent, focusing only on moving forward. All I could think about was going to Mom. Even after the visitation and the funeral, I didn't go back home. I spent time at Dad's, at my parents' house, trying to feel even a little bit of Mom's warmth by recalling the times we shared. But during that time, my phone kept ringing, the screen showing dozens of missed calls from Matthew and Karen. At first, I ignored them all, but their persistence wore me down, so I finally decided to pick up. The moment I answered, Matthew's angry shouting came through the line. When are you coming back? The funeral's over. What the hell are you thinking? I could hear Karen's voice faintly in the background. You're so selfish. I guess being useless runs in the family, huh? As their insults flew back and forth, I just listened quietly. The coldness in their words no longer surprised me. I had no intention of continuing this relationship with them any longer, and I was sure they had started to sense it, even if only a little. I could hear the desperation mixed in with their words, the frustration underlying their insults. They had finally realized my belongings were disappearing, and the signed divorce papers had been left in my room. It was their fault that I couldn't be there for my mom in her final moments. I resented them for that. I would never forgive them. The day Mom passed, when I returned home, I began packing up my things, careful not to let them notice. I only selected what was necessary, sending the important things and what I would need for the future to my parents' home. Neither Karen or Matthew showed any interest in me, or noticed that my things were disappearing. It was just as well it worked in my favor. I was going to disappear, just as they wished, like ashes blown by the wind. I couldn't stay with them any longer. I'm sorry, but I'm not coming back. You must have seen the divorce papers. Hearing this, Matthew only grew angrier. Don't regret divorcing me? Okay. I can easily crush that useless company of yours. Don't forget that. He continued with his usual threats. But this time, they didn't have any effect on me. I don't care. The moment I said those words, he exploded in fury and hung up the phone. It felt like everything was finally over. I thought Mom would be happy wherever she was. A few hours later, I received a call from the CEO of Matthew's company. By then, I already knew that Matthew had been saying things about my company, so I wasn't surprised when I picked up. Naomi, can you come here right now? Yes, of course. I'll be there shortly. I agreed and immediately left for Matthew's office. I took a cab to Matthew's company and was immediately escorted to the meeting room. In the room sat the CEO of the company that had been providing financial support, and Matthew, who had a somewhat smug look on his face. As I entered the room, Matthew spoke. CEO, as I mentioned earlier, Naomi and I are getting a divorce. There's no need to continue our association with her company. I think it's best to cut off funding. Matthew spoke so confidently, I was at a loss for words. But the CEO's gaze was icy and sharp. Do you even realize what you're saying? You're a regular employee. What business do you have making decisions like that? What? The moment those words were spoken, Matthew clearly became flustered. It was likely an unexpected cold response for him. Surprised and unable to respond right away, Matthew remained silent. And the CEO continued. Do you understand who made it possible for this company to exist? It was Naomi's father, Simon, who supported it. The story that the CEO shared was something I hadn't known about my dad. Not only did Simon provide funding to this company when it was on the brink of bankruptcy, but he also shared his customer list and helped facilitate agreements with other companies. Thanks to that, this company is still standing today. I had no idea that the CEO had been so deeply involved in helping my dad's company. You're getting your paycheck because of him. And now you're telling me to ruin the company that owes its survival to him? Are you asking me to betray my benefactor? Matthew turned pale as he tried to speak, but the CEO's cold gaze silenced him. My helping Naomi is because of the debt I owe Simon, not because of you. Don't get that twisted, the CEO shouted at Matthew, his anger palpable. Also, I heard you told her that the company should be destroyed. How do you know that? Matthew was clearly rattled, as those were the exact same words he used to threaten me at home. It was obvious he didn't know how the CEO had found out. I told him myself. During Mom's visitation hour, the CEO had come to the visitation hour a few days ago. Even though I hadn't sent him an invitation, I thought it would be a little strange to invite someone from the company, especially someone with no personal connection, to such an intimate occasion. But somehow, he found out and came anyway. Since the CEO had come all the way to attend, I escorted him to a seat at the back, and there, I opened up about my struggles with Matthew and Karen, and shared that I was considering a divorce. From what Matthew had told me, the CEO was apparently impressed with his work. So at first, I thought he would scold me for wanting a divorce, but it turned out to be completely different. The CEO listened to me with genuine concern. I was taken aback, but at that moment, I was also certain that Matthew's stories about his work were lies. When I spoke about the abuse I faced at home, the harassment from Karen, and of course, the threats Matthew had made, the CEO was just as angry as I was. He promised me that he would protect both me and the company. At the time, I didn't fully understand why he was so invested, but hearing about my dad's past involvement in the company, everything clicked into place. You betrayed me. Matthew, furious that I had shared details about him, clenched his fist as though ready to strike me. I flinched, bracing myself for the pain, but just as he was about to lash out, the CEO's shout stopped him in his tracks. You're the one who betrayed her. You're the heartless one who couldn't even attend her mother's funeral, and I feel ashamed that you're even in my company. The CEO's words had a palpable impact. Matthew hung his head, his face flushed with anger, but unable to speak. Naomi, you don't have to deal with this man ever again. I'll never forget the debt I owe Simon, so rest assured. The CEO's tone softened as he spoke to me, a stark contrast to his earlier fury. Thank you. Your words bring both me and my dad some peace. As Matthew listened to the CEO's words, his face turned pale. Even so, a misguided hope still lingered in him. He believed that he was someone the CEO respected, and he naively thought that he would be forgiven, that things would just blow over. However, the CEO's words shattered Matthew's delusions without mercy. You're misunderstanding something. The reason I've been giving you work is because I couldn't ignore the reports about your laziness. I've received numerous reports about how no one knows where you are most of the time. I thought maybe you'd improve, but now I feel betrayed. Matthew tried to come up with an excuse, but he didn't give him a chance. You're being demoted. There's an opening at a branch on a remote island. You'll be going there." Matthew finally seemed to grasp the severity of his situation after hearing those words. His arrogance, which had defined him for so long, evaporated, and he fell silent, fear creeping over him. The CEO's cold, decisive judgment laid Matthew's future bare for all to see. In that moment, it was clear that he no longer had a place here. Despite the crushing reality of his situation, he continued to relentlessly contact me, as if nothing had changed. He called and sent messages, pleading, "Can we try again? I won't let you divorce me that easily." But no amount of begging could sway me. Just hearing his voice brought back too many painful memories, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. Eventually, his persistence pushed me to hire a lawyer and pursue a divorce in court. I knew I had to put an end to his interference in my life for good. As the case progressed, more of his wrongdoings came to light, and the court's rulings increasingly favored me. It turned out he had been having an affair with a woman named Megan, and the evidence my private investigator uncovered was overwhelming. Her involvement sealed the deal, and when the court ruled that I could claim compensation, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was the end of that cold, heartless relationship. After the divorce, Matthew turned to Megan, but it seemed that she wasn't interested in him as he had hoped. I had seen her a few times. She was a young woman, likely in her mid-20s, with a lively, glamorous presence. I had sensed that Matthew was infatuated with her back then. However, Megan had done her research on Matthew and had no patience for his infidelity. She had quickly grown tired of him, and despite his desperate attempts, she had no intention of becoming his partner. After all, no one wanted to be involved with a man who had been demoted at work and was about to be sent to a remote island. Matthew then proposed to Megan, but she walked away without even responding. It seemed that he had been proposing to any woman he could find, but his desperate pleas only repelled them. When I heard that he had quit his job because he didn't want to be separated from Karen on the island, I simply thought, I knew it. His mama's boy complex was beyond repair. As time passed, he continued to live beyond his means, accumulating more debt. He had been lavish with women, throwing money around carelessly, but soon the bills began to pile up. Karen, as always, refused to work, and now that Matthew's salary had stopped, they were struggling to pay even the remaining balance on their mortgage. He looked for another job, but nothing seemed to work out. Bills and collection notices flooded in, and he found himself unable to keep up with payments. In the end, he was forced to file for bankruptcy. With nothing left, Matthew had to leave their house and move into a rundown apartment with Karen. Soon, the apartment became a mess. Karen, who had never lifted a finger to clean, now left the place in utter disarray. The stench of garbage filled the air, and complaints from neighbors came frequently. Every time I heard complaints from the neighbors, I couldn't help but think to myself, this is just karma. Karen, who had always left all the housework and cleaning to me, now refused to clean up after herself and was holed up in her room. It felt like karma had finally caught up with her. Then I heard that she had developed dementia and depression from her isolation. With no one left to support her, she became irritable and uncontrollable, to the point where even Matthew couldn't handle her. Matthew was no longer the man I once knew. Instead of taking care of her, he seemed to vanish from the house more and more, leaving me to deal with everything on my own. When I found out that they had to force Karen into psychiatric care, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction deep inside. And then, when I heard that Matthew had finally found a job in cleaning services, but was being treated poorly by everyone around him, Unable to fit in, I felt a subtle but growing sense of satisfaction. The man who used to look down on others was now the one silently picking up trash, enduring the gossip of his coworkers. To see the people who had once belittled me, pushed me around, and used me, now struggling, was utterly gratifying. On top of that, my business was gradually getting back on track. What had once barely survived thanks to outside funding was now standing on its own 2 feet, gaining momentum. Word spread through the industry about how my company had overcome its crisis, and soon young people started joining, eager to work under my leadership. I was beginning to be seen as the young CEO who had revived the company, and though I was a little embarrassed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Meanwhile, Dad, thanks to the relentless care and treatment, was slowly recovering. Though his muscles had weakened from his long time in bed, thanks to Mom's constant physical therapy, he was starting to walk again, little by little. One day, as I was heading out of the office, I spotted Matthew waiting outside. Confusion and shock mixed inside me as he suddenly saw me and rushed over, begging, "Naomi, please, take care of me. I'm begging you. Help me out." I looked down at him, but no words came to me. Without saying a thing, I turned and walked away, leaving him there. Since then, I've had no idea where he is or what he's doing. All I know is that I'm living my life.